When we think about space exploration, we all picture rockets and astronauts, right? But what about the invisible threads holding it all together? Today, we're pulling back the curtain on a true unsung hero, an agency you've probably never heard of called SANSA that was absolutely critical for humanity's return to the moon.
Okay, put yourself in this situation. You're an astronaut. You're hundreds of thousands of kilometers from home, on the far side of the moon, complete radio silence. So, who's making sure your signal actually gets back to Earth? I mean, who is your lifeline?
Well, for NASA's incredible Artemis II mission, the answer wasn't Houston, it wasn't Cape Canaveral, nope. The answer was a team of engineers in South Africa, managing a supercritical link in that deep space network.
All right, so here's our game plan. First, we'll look at the mission itself, humanity going back to the moon. Then we'll follow that crucial signal all the way to South Africa. We'll dig into a 60-year partnership and a really cool idea, how geography is actually a strategic asset. Then we'll look at South Africa's space future and why this whole story is so much more than just a little footnote.
All right, let's dive in. First up, humanity's return to the moon. And seriously, you can't overstate this. This was a massive deal. So get this, Artemis II was the first time people had flown to the moon since 1972. Just let that sink in for a second. More than half a century since Apollo 17. This was a truly monumental return.
And, as if that wasn't enough, they also broke a record. While they were swinging around the far side of the moon, the crew in their Orion capsule hit a distance of 406,771 kilometers from Earth. That is the absolute furthest any human has ever been from home.
So who were these history makers? We had NASA's Reid Wiseman, Victor Glover, and Christina Cook, along with Jeremy Hansen from the Canadian Space Agency. Just 4 people, out there in the black, completely relying on a global network to stay connected.
Okay, so how did that network keep them connected? Well, that brings us to maybe the most important link in that whole chain, this signal coming from South Africa.
See, way behind the scenes, far from all the cameras and the launch pads, you had this dedicated team from the South African National Space Agency, SANSA for short. They were at their Hartebeesthoek ground station, quietly making sure that that lifeline back to Earth was rock solid.
And I love this contrast. It's kind of wild, right? On one hand, you've got NASA's Orion capsule. I mean, this thing is the absolute cutting edge of space tech. And on the other hand, the lifeline connecting it all back to us was a couple of vintage antennas. But hey, they're proven, they're reliable, and they were completely essential.
You really have to think of it like a global relay race for data. No one country can keep in touch with a deep space mission 24/7. It's just not possible. So when Orion flies over the southern hemisphere, SANSA picks up the baton, tracks it, and relays that data straight into NASA's systems in real time.
But here's the thing, this whole collaboration, it wasn't just some one-off deal for this big mission. Nope. This is actually part of a partnership that goes back more than 60 years.
Yeah, this timeline really tells the story. You can see just how deep these roots are. NASA actually built the station way back in 1963. It even helped out during the Apollo 11 moon landing. Then, in '76, NASA handed the keys over to South Africa. You jump forward to 2011, SANSA is officially born, and that path leads directly to them playing this huge role in Artemis II.
So you gotta ask, why this place? What makes this one spot so irreplaceable? Well, the answer is surprisingly simple, and it's really the heart of this whole story. Geography itself is a strategic asset.
You know, Raoul Hodges, who's the executive director for space operations at SANSA, he explains it perfectly. He says if you want continuous communications coverage, you have to have ground stations in both the northern and southern hemispheres. It's non-negotiable. It's basic physics, orbital mechanics. You just can't get around it.
And that right there is the key takeaway. South Africa's location isn't just a dot on a map. It's a seriously powerful strategic asset. In the game of space exploration, that location is a form of capital.
Think about it. In this new space race, with countries and private companies all jumping in, having control over this kind of ground infrastructure gives you real leverage. Your spot on the globe becomes an essential piece of the puzzle for any big deep space mission.
And here's the cool part. South Africa isn't just sitting back and coasting on its history. No way. They are actively pouring resources into their future in space. SANSA is really building on this momentum. They're expanding, building a whole new ground station, and, this is huge, they're training the next generation of South African space professionals. So this was never just about Artemis II. It's about making sure South Africa is a key player for Artemis 3, 4, and, everything that comes after.
Okay, so let's wrap this up. When you look at the big picture, SANSA's part in this historic mission, it wasn't just helpful, it was completely and totally foundational.
This whole mission basically proved that SANSA is, and I'm quoting here, a capable, internationally contracted, technically precise institution. What that means in plain English is that they are operating right at the edge of global science and strategic infrastructure.
And that's why their contribution isn't just some little footnote in the history of Artemis. It's a core, fundamental reason for its success.
So, I'll leave you with this question to chew on. As we keep pushing out into the cosmos, exploring new frontiers, what other essential foundations, what other quiet unsung heroes like SANSA have been there the whole time, just making it all possible?